January 1941. The frozen fields of northern France are slick with ice and churned mud. A light drizzle blurs the horizon, turning the already treacherous landscape into a quagmire. German officers, clad in polished boots and steel helmets, gather around a crude, boxy vehicle. They laugh. A small American Jeep, with its thin tires and simple canvas top, rumbles uncertainly across the frozen earth. "You expect that to carry men through this?" One officer sneers, shaking his head. Another taps the frame, smirking. Their confidence is absolute. They've seen tanks, trucks, and armored cars far heavier and stronger. Yet here, this little machine, barely bigger than a horse-drawn carriage, struggles through mud that would stall anything less nimble. Inside, a young American driver grips the wheel, eyes forward, boots braced. He doesn't laugh. He doesn't flinch. The Jeep surges forward, bouncing over frozen ruts, splashing through icy puddles, leaving a trail of astonished faces in its wake. In that moment, a quiet revolution begins, one that will roll across Europe, defying every expectation, and proving that speed, agility, and ingenuity can sometimes outweigh sheer power. The laughter of officers would soon turn to disbelief in 1939. Europe teetered on the edge of war. The world had not yet recovered from the economic chaos of the Great Depression, and armies were still rebuilding, experimenting with mechanization and motorized transport. Tanks had emerged as decisive tools on the battlefield, but the infrastructure of roads and fuel supply often limited their reach. Trucks and motorcycles were in use, yet many armies remained reliant on horses, wagons, and rail. Mobility was constrained, and commanders knew it. Across the Atlantic, the United States watched. From a distance, its factories largely focused on civilian production. Automobiles were commonplace in American towns, but the military had little standardized light vehicles. Army officers had long dreamed of a vehicle that could replace horses, tow small artillery, carry troops, and traverse any terrain. It had to be light, versatile, and most importantly reliable. In 1940, with war engulfing Europe and the British Isles under threat, the U.S. Army issued a challenge. They wanted a per-ton, four-wheel drive reconnaissance vehicle, capable of carrying 4 soldiers, crossing rivers, climbing steep grades, and operating in mud, snow, and sand. The specifications were rigorous. A wheelbase of just 80 inches, a 600-pound payload capacity, foldable windshield, and a top speed of 50 miles per hour. Most civilian manufacturers had never attempted anything like it. American industry responded with unprecedented speed. Willys of L and Ford, and Bantam Car companies submitted prototypes, each reflected a different philosophy. Bantam, a small Pennsylvania firm, produced a compact, lightweight machine that impressed the Army with its agility but struggled with durability. Willys of Land's design emphasized a strong, high-torque engine capable of towing artillery. Ford took the Willys design and refined it for mass production, ensuring thousands could roll off assembly lines in weeks. Meanwhile, in Germany, Hitler's generals were focused elsewhere. The Wehrmacht had perfected the Blitzkrieg, armored divisions, supported by motorized infantry and air power, moving with unprecedented speed to overwhelm slower, less coordinated enemies. German planners assumed the Allies lacked comparable mobility. Trucks were heavy, wheeled vehicles, often bogged down in mud and snow. Horses still formed the backbone of supply lines. When American engineers unveiled a small, seemingly fragile reconnaissance vehicle, German officers laughed openly at its simplicity. Yet even before deployment, the Jeep had one advantage the Germans could not anticipate: adaptability. Its compact frame allowed it to be modified for dozens of roles. Some were equipped as ambulances, others as radio command vehicles, artillery tractors, or weapon carriers. Soldiers could strip down its bodywork to cross deeper mud or snow, or attach a winch to pull other vehicles from Its engine ran on standard gasoline, making fuel supply simpler than for heavier trucks. The Jeep's designers had not only met the Army's specifications, they had exceeded them, creating a platform whose flexibility would define modern warfare. By mid-1941, production was ramping up. Willys and Ford could each produce thousands of vehicles per month. The Army recognized that it had not merely acquired a new transport vehicle, it had created a force multiplier. Small squads could move faster than before, artillery could be repositioned with ease. and reconnaissance could now extend across battlefields that had once been inaccessible. The stage was set. While German officers remained confident in the superiority of their armored divisions, American industry was quietly assembling a weapon of mobility and ingenuity. The world had yet to see the Jeep in combat, but its impact would soon ripple across forests, fields, deserts, and snowbound plains. Every inch of mud conquered, every ditch crossed, would prove that innovation often outweighs brute force. And yet, the first true test awaited not in an American factory or proving ground, but on the frozen, shell-scarred battlefields of Europe, where skepticism and ridicule would meet resilience and design in a collision that few could have predicted. By the summer of 1941, the world's conflict had intensified. Germany's Wehrmacht had unleashed blitzkrieg across Poland, Belgium, and France. Tanks and mechanized infantry moved with terrifying speed, leaving disorganized resistance in their wake. Roads and railways were clogged with retreating soldiers and refugees, yet the German army seemed unstoppable. They had perfected coordination between tanks, trucks, and dive bombers, a combination that few had ever seen, let alone resisted. Meanwhile, the Allies scrambled to respond. Britain faced constant threat from the Luftwaffe, and its forces were stretched thin. Across the Atlantic, the US military prepared quietly but urgently. Supplies, weapons, and vehicles were stockpiled, and industrial mobilization had begun in earnest. Among these preparations was the Jeep, a small, unassuming vehicle that promised to redefine mobility in war. Yet, in the European theaters, skepticism lingered. Allied officers, wary of untested machines, questioned whether a 600-pound reconnaissance vehicle could survive the mud, snow, and chaos of modern battlefields. Winter campaigns had proven particularly brutal. In northern France and the Low Countries, frozen rivers and churned farmland became obstacles that immobilized even heavy trucks. The German army, equipped with motorcycles and larger vehicles, sometimes struggled to maintain supply lines. In the Eastern Front, snow and ice added another layer of difficulty. Roads vanished beneath frost, rivers froze unevenly, and columns of vehicles became easy targets for artillery and air attacks. Logistics, often overlooked in romanticized accounts of armored warfare, proved decisive. A machine that could traverse impossible terrain would become a lifeline. The Jeep, in concept, was tailor-made for this environment. Lightweight yet durable, it could navigate mud that trapped trucks and tanks. It could climb embankments, ford streams, and traverse narrow paths impassable to conventional vehicles. Its four-wheel drive and short wheelbase offered traction and maneuverability unmatched by any Allied truck. Soldiers began to imagine its potential. Scouts could gather intelligence faster. Messengers could deliver orders where radios were impracticable. Medics could evacuate the wounded from the front lines. For commanders, it represented a mobility multiplier that no horse or heavy vehicle could match. Production ramped up alongside training. Soldiers learned how to maintain, repair, and even improvise modifications in the field. Jeeps were equipped with spare parts, winches, and sometimes machine guns. Crews developed techniques to navigate mud, snow, and icy slopes. In Normandy and the hedgerows of France, and later in North Africa's deserts, these vehicles became essential, often bridging gaps that traditional supply chains could not. Across enemy lines, German officers dismissed these developments with casual confidence. Reports filtered back from reconnaissance missions. A small American vehicle carrying officers or radio equipment across mud and snow. The reaction was often laughter. One German officer wrote in his diary, unable to carry real men or endure serious conditions. They underestimated both the design and the men who would drive them. Yet that underestimation, repeated across multiple theaters, would soon prove costly. Meanwhile, the psychological and strategic implications began to surface. Soldiers on the front lines noticed that rapid, mobile forces could respond to unexpected developments, move artillery and supplies with speed, and exploit weaknesses that traditional vehicles could not reach. The Jeep's presence allowed small units to achieve outsized impact. Even when numbers were small, these light vehicles enhanced coordination, giving Allied forces a flexibility that German planners had not accounted for. By late 1941, the stage was fully set. Across forests, fields, and frozen plains, the first waves of Jeeps rolled into action. Ridicule from distant German officers still lingered, but the reality on the ground was different. Where trucks bogged down, the Jeep surged forward. Where horses faltered, it pulled artillery or carried wounded men. Where roads vanished, it carved new paths. The battlefield had shifted, subtly at first, then unmistakably that in the coming months, this small vehicle would become a symbol of American ingenuity, a weapon of logistics, and a tool of surprise. German laughter, once confident and scornful, would meet mud, snow, and relentless momentum, and in that collision of expectation and reality, the story of the Jeep and the soldiers who depended on it would unfold in full. On the front lines, the Jeep became more than a vehicle, it became a lifeline. Soldiers recalled it as a dependable companion amid chaos. Infantrymen, often forced to march through mud, ice, and shell-scarred terrain, suddenly had the ability to move with speed and relative comfort. Orders that once took hours to relay could now arrive in minutes. Medics transported wounded men over frozen rivers and through cratered fields, often saving lives that would otherwise have been lost to exhaustion or exposure. Young drivers, sometimes barely 20 years old, found themselves at the helm of machines that could traverse terrain deemed impossible by older, more experienced officers. The Jeep demanded skill, but it rewarded initiative. Crews learned to balance speed with caution. Too fast and the vehicle could flip or get stuck. Too slow and the enemy might intercept them. Letters from soldiers capture this human bond. One sergeant wrote from France in 1944, "That little Jeep carried us where no truck dared. It slid through mud, crossed streams, and somehow never quit." It was as if the machine understood the war better than we did. The Jeep became a trusted partner, a vehicle that reduced fear and extended endurance in mud, snow, and desert. It transformed how men experienced war, less a march of attrition and more a coordinated, agile advance. From a tactical perspective, the Jeep altered the mechanics of war. Previously, mobility was tied to heavy trucks or mechanized infantry, both constrained by terrain and logistical bottlenecks. The Jeep's small size, lightweight, and four-wheel drive allowed it to operate where larger vehicles could not. Reconnaissance. Units could scout enemy positions, relay artillery coordinates, and conduct rapid raids without waiting for cumbersome transport. During the North African campaign, British and American forces adapted the Jeep for desert warfare. Stripped-out models, fitted with jerrycans and spare tires, darted across dunes to flank Axis positions. In France, Jeep convoys navigated narrow roads and forest paths, delivering ammunition and evacuating casualties faster than any horse-drawn supply train could manage. The Jeep's tactical value extended beyond reconnaissance. Light machine guns mounted on Jeeps provided mobile fire support, while communication teams established forward radio posts on vehicles that could quickly relocate. Its flexibility allowed commanders to adapt strategy in real time. Speed and maneuverability became force multipliers, and even small units gained disproportionate influence over localized engagements. The Jeep's engineering was deceptively simple. Beneath its modest exterior lay a robust high-torque engine, a short wheelbase optimized for traction, and a lightweight frame that allowed modifications on the fly. Designers had prioritized standardization, parts were interchangeable, maintenance straightforward, and production scalable. This approach allowed thousands of Jeeps to be built in weeks, a feat unimaginable in the pre-war years. Innovation extended to battlefield adaptation. Soldiers learned to fit winches, carry radios, mount machine guns, and even modify suspension to handle specific terrain challenges. Its four-wheel drive system, combined with independent leaf spring suspension, allowed the Jeep to traverse mud, snow, and uneven ground far better than most trucks or armored cars. It was a platform for ingenuity as much as transport. The Jeep's technology also simplified logistics. It ran on standard gasoline, reducing supply complexity. Spare parts were minimal yet sufficient, allowing frontline repairs. For engineers and mechanics, the Jeep represented a new philosophy of wartime vehicle design. Reliability, adaptability, and mass production as equally important as firepower for Allied commanders. The Jeep was a revelation. Generals and field officers quickly recognized that mobility, often underestimated in conventional planning, could dictate outcomes on the battlefield. Decisions that once required elaborate coordination now relied on nimble vehicles, capable of rapid response. In early 1942, U.S. Army planners organized exercises to test the Jeep's potential. Officers discovered that supply lines could be shortened, reconnaissance expanded, and artillery supported across terrain previously deemed impassable. Senior officers, including General George C. Marshall, began incorporating light vehicle mobility into broader operational strategy, realizing that these small machines could amplify combat effectiveness without significant manpower or cost. Commanders also embraced a Jeep as a morale booster. Troops who previously endured grueling marches found that small, reliable transport fostered confidence. Leaders could project authority and presence across dispersed units. In critical moments, commanders used Jeeps to deliver orders directly to forward positions, reducing communication delays that might otherwise have caused confusion or friendly incidents. Across enemy lines, the Jeep was initially dismissed. German officers, conditioned by the success of Blitzkrieg and their own mechanized divisions, saw little threat in a small American reconnaissance vehicle. Diaries and intercepted communications reveal their skepticism. It cannot carry real men or supplies. It is a toy, one officer noted. Yet field encounters quickly challenged this perception. German soldiers observed Jeeps moving swiftly through mud, snow, and forest paths terrain that immobilized their heavier trucks. Small squads, using Jeeps for reconnaissance or flanking maneuvers, appeared and disappeared with frustrating speed. German artillery and armored units, designed to counter large-scale movements, often found themselves outmaneuvered. The psychological effect was profound. Officers who had once laughed began reporting surprise and frustration. The Jeep undermined assumptions about terrain limitations and mobility dominance. Where German doctrine relied on predictability, the Jeep introduced unpredictability, an often underestimated factor in warfare. Strategically, the Jeep exemplified a larger principle, that ingenuity and adaptability could outweigh sheer size or firepower. Its deployment allowed Allied forces to stretch thin resources effectively, conduct reconnaissance in hostile areas, and maintain operational flexibility across multiple theaters. The Jeep's moral impact extended beyond immediate battle. Soldiers trusted it, relied on it, and often credited it with saving lives. Its presence on the battlefield conveyed a message. The U.S. military had embraced innovation and mass production efficiency. This bolstered Allied confidence while sowing doubt and frustration among the Axis. Moreover, the Jeep became a symbol of logistical supremacy. Armies could move faster, respond to enemy maneuvers, and sustain themselves in difficult environments. Mud, snow, or desert sand no longer dictated the pace of operations. Its small size belied its influence, a fraction of the weight and cost of a tank, yet capable of amplifying combat effectiveness in ways German commanders had not anticipated. It was the winter of 1942-1943, across the frozen plains of northern Europe. The war had settled into a brutal rhythm of advance, retreat, and attritional struggle. The German Wehrmacht, confident in its mechanized superiority, had not anticipated the arrival of the Jeep on the front lines in Normandy, in the forests of France, and along the icy rivers of Belgium. The first waves of American light vehicles began to demonstrate their quiet, unstoppable power. On a fog-shrouded morning near the Meuse River, a small column of Jeeps pushed forward through churned mud. The German 15th Panzer Division had established defensive positions, expecting any movement to be slow and predictable. But these vehicles, carrying reconnaissance teams and light machine guns, slipped past entrenched obstacles. They forded streams that stalled trucks, climbed embankments that blocked supply convoys, and weaved between artillery positions with unnerving speed. German officers watched through binoculars, disbelief etched across their faces. What had been dismissed as toys now moved with a precision that machines 3 times their size struggled to achieve. How can such a small vehicle carry men and supplies across this terrain? One officer reportedly asked, shaking his head. By mid-morning, these Jeeps had delivered critical intelligence, redirected artillery fire, and evacuated casualties, all while maintaining mobility in mud and ice that would have immobilized conventional vehicles. In North Africa, the scenario was equally striking. During the desert campaigns of late 1942, Jeeps darted across dunes, carrying fuel, ammunition, and dispatches between widely separated units. Their agility allowed Allied forces to execute rapid flanking maneuvers, striking Axis supply lines with speed and efficiency. Tanks and heavy trucks, slowed by sand and heat, watched helplessly as these small vehicles dictated the pace of engagement. The jeeps. Success was not merely in transport, it was in adaptability. Soldiers stripped down canvas tops, reinforced suspension, and mounted machine guns. Radio teams transformed jeeps into mobile command posts, enabling rapid response to shifting battle conditions. Field modifications, improvised on the spot, multiplied the vehicle's utility far beyond its original reconnaissance role. Winter in France, however, would mark the true turning point. Roads had become rivers of frozen mud, artillery fire had cratered fields, and snowstorms could immobilize entire divisions. Yet the jeep continued to advance, unyielding. Convoys delivered rations, ammunition, and medical supplies to frontline units cut off for days. Scouts mapped German positions, guiding infantry and tanks through areas previously deemed impassable. Each success chipped away at enemy confidence and validated the American faith in a small, versatile vehicle. In private communications, German intelligence began to note the anomaly. Reports described vehicles moving as if the mud did not exist, transporting men faster than horses, and appearing where no road was present. Laughter turned to unease. Officers once dismissive now grappled with the implications. This was not mere transport, it was a tactical revolution on wheels, even among American commanders. The moment carried significance. General Patton, observing a column of jeeps negotiating a frozen ford, remarked that they had transformed operational mobility. What was previously impossible, rapid troop movement across difficult terrain, was now achievable. The war's tempo could be dictated not only by tanks and artillery but by the speed, flexibility, and ingenuity of light vehicles and the men who drove them. The battlefield, long considered the domain of sheer force, had been redefined. A small, simple vehicle, the product of American industrial innovation, now forced generals and soldiers alike to rethink assumptions about mobility, logistics, and strategy. As night fell over the Meuse, the jeeps parked on the snow-slicked roadsides, engines idling quietly. Soldiers huddled inside, warmed by the engine's heat and the knowledge that these vehicles had carried them safely across terrain that had doomed others. Across the front, German officers conferred anxiously. This small American machine, once the subject of derision, had proven that speed, ingenuity, and adaptability could defy expectation, and that ridicule often precedes astonishment. The stage was set for the final phase of the jeep's demonstration of dominance. Continuous, relentless operations across mud, snow, and battlefield chaos that would shock even the most confident German commanders. Spring, 1944. The Allied advance had intensified. Across Normandy's hedgerows, mud-caked fields, and bombed-out villages, the jeep had become indispensable. Every unit relied on its versatility. Reconnaissance teams scouted ahead. Artillery crews received orders faster than ever, and medics transported the wounded across terrain that had stalled heavier vehicles for days. German officers, once confident in their superiority, now faced disbelief. On a foggy morning near Cannes, a column of German troops watched as a convoy of jeeps slipped through a flooded ditch, avoiding mines and shell craters. "Impossible," muttered an officer. "They should be mired, yet they move as if the mud itself obeys them." The observation was not hyperbole. Reports from the front noted jeeps carrying for soldiers with full gear, towing artillery pieces, and delivering critical supplies all across terrain that had rendered trucks useless and horses exhausted. In Italy, similar scenes unfolded. Rugged mountain roads, slippery with snowmelt, had traditionally slowed troop movements. Yet jeeps navigated steep passes with nimble precision, ferrying engineers and artillery crews to forward positions. Small squads could now establish strongpoints in hours rather than days. The German army, relying on predictable movement and rigid supply lines, struggled to anticipate these rapid deployments. The vehicle's adaptability amplified its effect. Machine guns mounted on reinforced frames allowed mobile firepower. Radios, carried on modified jeeps, provided continuous communication where field lines were destroyed or non-existent. Jeeps became the nerve centers of small units, giving commanders unprecedented situational awareness and tactical flexibility. Soldiers learned to improvise. Sand mats for traction, spare tires lashed to the chassis, even makeshift armor plates to protect against shrapnel. Every adaptation increased survivability, speed, and operational effectiveness in Belgium's frozen forests of late 1944. During the Battle of the Bulge, the Jeep's performance reached a new zenith. Snow and ice immobilized tanks and trucks, slowing German advances and threatening Allied supply lines. Yet Jeep convoys, laden with ammunition, medical supplies, and officers, pressed forward. Defying blizzards and deep snow, they created corridors of movement through otherwise impassable terrain, allowing infantry to regroup and counterattack. German units, expecting to exploit immobilized Allied forces, were confronted with mobility they could not match. The astonishment was evident in reports. Intercepted German communications described the American small vehicles moving faster than thought possible, carrying men, arms, and supplies across snow and mud with infuriating speed. Officers who had once laughed at the Jeep now documented its capabilities with a mixture of respect and alarm. The very tools they had dismissed as trivial had become agents of tactical surprise and operational efficiency. For Allied soldiers, the Jeep became synonymous with resilience. It carried the wounded from shell-cratered fields, delivered ammunition through flooded lanes, and carried officers across zones of uncertainty. Morale soared. A sergeant in France wrote, "I have ridden through mud, snow, and hail in that little thing. I wouldn't trade it for a tank. It saves men, it moves us, it wins battles without firing a shot." By mid-1945, the cumulative effect was clear. Across Europe, the Jeep had not only changed the pace of war, it had redefined it. Where German mechanized divisions had once relied on heavy vehicles and predictable movements, they now faced American forces that could adapt, react, and advance with unprecedented speed. The laughter that greeted the Jeep in 1940 had transformed into stunned respect. Officers who had mocked its small frame now confronted a vehicle that symbolized ingenuity, flexibility, and the decisive advantage of mobility. In battlefield terms, the Jeep had become a force multiplier. Its presence altered engagements, shortened supply lines, increased communication efficiency, and enhanced infantry and artillery coordination. What was once a prototype dismissed as fragile had proven capable of sustaining armies across mud, snow, rivers, and rugged terrain. The front lines once dictated by roads and rivers were now defined by the Jeep's ability to traverse them. And so, from derision to astonishment, the Jeep completed its transformation. A small American machine, laughed at by Hitler's officers, had conquered Europe's mud and snow, carrying men, machines, and hope across a continent engulfed in war. The war moved on. But the consequences of this transformation, tactical, strategic, and psychological, would echo in the aftermath. Allied forces recognized its value, German forces recalibrated their expectations, and the battlefield had been irrevocably altered. By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe had ended, but the echoes of small, versatile vehicles like the Jeep remained unmistakable across countless battlefields, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the frozen rivers of Belgium. From the deserts of North Africa to the mountains of Italy, the Jeep had proved itself indispensable. It was not a weapon of destruction in the traditional sense, yet its contribution to mobility, logistics, and coordination had been decisive. The numbers tell part of the story. By the war's end, over 600,000 Jeeps had been produced by Willys Overland and Ford. Each vehicle could carry 4 soldiers, tow light, artillery, transport supplies, or serve as a mobile command post. Their widespread deployment allowed Allied units to maintain momentum, respond to unforeseen enemy actions, and operate across terrain that previously dictated operational limits. Logistics, often the invisible backbone of warfare, had been transformed. Where trucks bogged down and horses grew exhausted, Jeeps pressed forward, delivering ammunition, food, and medical aid. Field reports consistently highlighted their reliability. In one after-action report from the Ardennes, an American lieutenant noted, "The Jeep allowed us to keep units supplied and coordinated where previously only failure awaited. It is small, but it carries the weight of our operation." In North Africa, officers recorded Jeeps ferrying troops across sand dunes while heavier trucks floundered. and in France, they enabled the evacuation of wounded soldiers through flooded lanes that had immobilized all other vehicles. German reactions, recorded in both diaries and intelligence reports, evolved from mockery to stunned acknowledgement. Commanders who had once laughed at the small vehicles began to factor them into defensive planning. The unpredictability of light fast units forced the Wehrmacht to divert resources to counter what was initially considered a minor threat. Across the front lines, German logistical assumptions were challenged, and tactical doctrines were forced to adapt in real time. The Jeep's operational success was not merely tactical, it was psychological. Allied soldiers gained confidence, knowing that mobility and adaptability could overcome obstacles that might have otherwise delayed or halted operations. In contrast, German troops confronted the unsettling reality of small, nimble vehicles appearing where they were least expected. Ridicule had turned into respect, and confidence into caution. Beyond the battlefield, production realities underscored the vehicle's significance. The ability to produce hundreds of thousands of vehicles in months, each standardized for parts, maintenance, and repairs, demonstrated American industrial capacity. Factories operated around the clock, employing tens of thousands of workers, many women, to meet demand. Willys and Ford coordinated production with military supply chains, ensuring that each Jeep could be delivered to the right unit, in the right theater, at the right time. Industrial ingenuity had translated directly into battlefield superiority. Jeep also reshaped how armies approached mobility and logistics. Commanders began designing operations around vehicles capable of rapid deployment, flexibility, and reliability. Roads, rivers, and terrain no longer dictated operational limitations as severely as before, where the Jeepo armies could exploit opportunities, reinforce positions, and evacuate casualties with unprecedented speed. It was a quiet revolution, a single, small vehicle altering the dynamics of movement, coordination, and battlefield control. This was the immediate aftermath of the battlefield impact of the Jeep fully realized. But its influence extended beyond war reports and production statistics. It reshaped the psychology of soldiers and officers alike, created new tactical doctrines, and forced the enemy to recalibrate assumptions about mobility and adaptability. As the war ended and Europe lay in ruins, the Jeep's legacy became clear. Its contribution was not measured in tanks destroyed or artillery silenced, but in the countless small actions that shaped the pace, flexibility, and morale of Allied operations. Soldiers' memoirs frequently cite the Jeep as a lifesaver, a tool of ingenuity, and a symbol of American resilience. In France, one infantryman recalled, "That little vehicle carried us where nothing else could. It saved the wounded, it delivered ammo, it brought officers to the front lines. Without it, our advance would have been slower, our losses higher." Across multiple theaters, soldiers echoed similar sentiments. The Jeep had allowed units to exploit gaps, reinforce positions, and maintain momentum in a way that heavier vehicles simply could not. Strategically, the Jeep altered the calculus of mobility. German generals, accustomed to dictating the battlefield with tanks and mechanized divisions, found their assumptions undermined. Small, fast-moving vehicles, complicated defensive planning, forced redeployment of resources, and enabled Allied forces to exploit terrain that had been considered impassable. By the time of the Ardennes counteroffensive, German officers had acknowledged that these vehicles, once dismissed as trivial, could shape the outcome of engagements. Beyond immediate combat, the Jeep influenced post-war doctrine. Armies around the world recognized that mobility, adaptability, and logistical flexibility were as crucial as firepower. Light, multi-purpose vehicles became standard in militaries globally, setting the stage for modern mechanized infantry and rapid response forces. The Jeep's design principles, simplicity, reliability, and adaptability, became a blueprint for generations of military vehicles. The psychological impact endured as well. Soldiers trusted the Jeep. It became a symbol of initiative and survival. In letters and memoirs, veterans frequently contrasted its reliability with the limitations of heavier vehicles. Its ability to traverse mud, snow, and rough terrain reinforced a sense of agency. No road was too difficult, no obstacle insurmountable. This confidence translated into operational effectiveness. Units that had access to Jeeps could maneuver with speed and precision, while those dependent on traditional trucks faced delays, exposure, and attrition. On the German side, the Jeep's presence became a lesson in underestimation. Officers who had laughed at the vehicle in 1940 were forced to respect its strategic value in 1944-45. Reports and diaries document frustration and recalibrated strategies. Supply lines needed guarding, flanking movements anticipated, and terrain reassessed. The simple American vehicle had reshaped not only operations but the enemy's perception of what constituted mobility and battlefield capability. In industrial terms, the Jeep also set a precedent. Mass production, standardization, and modular design allowed rapid deployment of functional vehicles in multiple theaters. It showcased the power of American industrial capacity as a force multiplier. The Jeep was proof that innovation combined with scale could decisively influence modern warfare, even without heavy armor or superior firepower. By the war's end, the Jeep had transcended its original role. It was no longer merely a reconnaissance or transport vehicle. It had become an instrument of tactical and psychological warfare, a logistical enabler, and an icon of adaptability. Its impact rippled across armies, influencing doctrine, strategy, and the very perception of mobility in warfare. From mud-slicked fields to snowbound forests, the Jeep had proven itself not just capable, but transformative. Its legacy would endure beyond World War II, shaping military thought, vehicle design, and soldier experience for decades to come. The war had ended, but the lessons of innovation, mobility, and adaptability, the principles embodied by this small vehicle, remained, pointing toward a future in which warfare would no longer be defined solely by brute force. The Jeep, in its modest frame and unassuming design, became one of the quiet revolutions of World War II. What began as a prototype dismissed by Hitler's officers had proven that ingenuity, adaptability, and speed could redefine the rules of warfare. It was not the largest vehicle on the battlefield, nor the most heavily armed, but it was the most versatile, the most reliable, and in many ways the most transformative. Its impact extended beyond statistics or battlefield reports. For soldiers, it was a lifeline, a partner in survival, and a symbol of American resourcefulness. For commanders, it was a tactical multiplier, allowing rapid redeployment, flexible strategy, and real-time response. For the enemy, it was a lesson in underestimation. Dismissing innovation, no matter how small, could prove costly. Across mud-choked roads, snow-laden fields, and desert expanses, the Jeep carried men, supplies, and hope where others faltered. The lessons of the Jeep endure. Modern warfare, with its emphasis on mobility, rapid logistics, and adaptable vehicles, traces its roots back to these small American machines. Its success illustrated that battlefield advantage often comes not from sheer firepower, but from clever design, relentless experimentation, and the human will to overcome terrain, obstacles, and doubt. More than a tool of war, the Jeep became a cultural icon, a symbol of perseverance, ingenuity, and the power of simplicity. From the frozen rivers of Europe to the deserts of Africa, it carried the weight of a conflict and the hopes of soldiers who depended on it. In doing so, it reshaped how wars were fought and how victories were won. In the end, the story of the Jeep is a reminder that greatness is not always loud or heavy. Sometimes, it comes in small, resolute packages, able to defy expectation, traverse impossible terrain, and leave a mark on history far greater than its size might suggest. From laughter to astonishment, from prototype to legend, the Jeep conquered not just mud and snow, but the imagination of those who witnessed its quiet, unstoppable power.